Okay, good morning. Time now 8 a.m. On the Friday, October 20th, 2023. Welcome to another edition of the World Bank Tokyo Online Morning Seminar. My name is Koichi Omori. I am Senior External Affairs Officer of the World Bank based in Tokyo. We organize these online morning seminars to introduce the newest, latest report by the World Bank presented by the authors of those reports. Actually, they are the World Bank's economists and specialists. This morning, we are going to feature the new report, Informality and Inclusive Growth in the Middle East and North Africa. This was released in June earlier this year. We have two speakers connecting from Washington. Actually, they are the lead authors of this report. We have Gladys Lopez Acevedo, who is the lead economist in the poverty global practice in the Middle East and North Africa region. And also we have Marco Lanzani, who is also the senior economist from the same unit, the Middle East, North Africa region poverty global practice. They're going to share with us the main and key point of the report for the next 40 minutes or so. Then after their presentation, I'll read the questions that we received from you in advance. If you did not have opportunities to send your question in advance, please send your question by using the online form posted on the announcement page of this seminar, or you can simply post your questions on the chat section of the YouTube screen. I'll read your question on your behalf, asking the both speakers to respond. So with that, I would like to formally invite Gladys and Marco to come in to start the presentation. Over to you. Thank you.
On the contrary, many thanks, Koichi. We want really to thank you for giving us this opportunity and platform to share the findings of this important report. As you mentioned, Informality and Inclusive Growth in MENA was very recently released. It took more than 2 years effort because a challenge in the region is also the availability of data. So we had to work very closely with colleagues in the country offices and statistical offices in order to be able to complete this report. We are very grateful. We want to take this opportunity to thank many collaborators in this report, the statistical offices in the countries in the region, for coming together in this very important topic. Another colleague, Nishta and Adam couldn't be here, but they were important part of the team. We look really forward to the discussion, particularly, as you said, Koichi, on the way forward and the implications of this important study, which has generated a lot of debate in the region in terms of, and also at the bank, in terms of how to move forward in this topic, in this important topic. I mean, what will be the stages and steps that the bank needs to develop to be able to better serve the countries, and also a debate in terms of how countries want to take formality in the future given their initial conditions. So without say, I handle the presentation to Marco, and we will spend, as you indicated, particularly a lot of time in discussing the implications of this important policy report to hear, hopefully from your audience, what is that they think. We wanted to open the debate. What is that they think? How is that they think the bank should respond in this important topic, which is not only for the region, as you know, also is important for many other regions at the World Bank, which are facing similar challenges. Thank you very much, Koichi.
Thank you, Gladys. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having us and connecting. I'll try to keep it to 35, 40 minutes. it's a quite a dense report, so we'll probably not do justice to the all the content and details. So I invite you to download the report that is available online. There is also a blog, this presentation is to just give you a broad idea and then concentrate on some policy suggestions based on the work that has been done in these three countries, Morocco, Tunisia, and Egypt. Okay, so in the region, we can speak for the three countries we analyzed, but this is also true in many other countries in the Middle East and North Africa region. So far, what has happened over the past decades is that to address the challenges of development of extending social protection and inclusive growth, that a piecemeal approach has often been implemented. As you know, social security systems in the region were born to provide initially protection on the job and benefits after retirement to a very small group of workers. These are civil servants, so workers in the public sector. Then gradually, an incremental approach was adopted. So that meant extending what was initially designed for this small group of workers to other workers. Initially, employees of state-owned enterprises, employees in the formal sector, and there have been some recent efforts, especially in Morocco over the past couple of years, to extend the same or a similar contributory system to the pool of the self-employed, or at least to part of them. At the same time, what is called non-contributory social insurance, so benefits that workers or citizens, sometimes in general, get without paying any contributions, are often designed as cash transfer programs that typically provide a monthly amount to households in need, together with some health insurance. In parallel, own account workers and micro small enterprises, since they were not part of the under the radar of the authorities, have oftentimes been benefiting from special tax regimes that were created ad hoc to just bring them under the tax system. As we will see in the rest of the presentation, these oftentimes mean just paying very little money to the tax authority and not providing incentives to grow in terms of size and productivity. And on another hand, there have been efforts to introduce reforms in terms of making the different sectors more competitive and kind of rebalancing the role of these large state-owned enterprises, but efforts have not been very effective so far. Recently, including with the COVID pandemic and other shocks, the issues that concern all these aspects, all this lack of social protection for many workers, and kind of highlighted again the limits of this piecemeal approach and its negative consequences that we'll see in a minute. This approach has led to what we call in the report a suboptimal equilibrium. Suboptimal in a number of ways. First of all, because it provides limited coverage of country population against contingency, so against health risk, against longevity risk, against job loss risk. It also produces little or reduced limited risk pooling, because there is a limited fraction of the population that participates into these contributory schemes, and little redistribution among the population. and also leads to little revenues or lower revenues that could be collected compared to a situation where everybody is covered and paying taxes. This, on the other hand, provides limited resources to government to deliver good quality or high quality public goods and public services. Last but not least, all this equilibrium comes with also low productivity and limited economic growth, or subpar economic growth compared to a different situation to a first best equilibrium. This suboptimal equilibrium, one way it shows up is through via large shares of informal employment. In the MENA region, and specifically in the 3 countries we have looked at, informal employment rates are quite high. In the case of Tunisia, data from 2019, the informal employment rate is about 44%, in Morocco 77%, in Egypt in a similar year 62%. And this is quite pervasive, because it does not only concern the poor, but as you can see from this graph, where we show the deciles of household level income or expenditures depending on the country, we see that the rate of informality is very high or quite high. Also in the middle of the distribution, what you see as decile 5, and even at the top, depending on the country. So it's not something that concerns only the poor, but also the middle class and the rich, perhaps for different reasons, but still it affects the population along the income spectrum or the expenditure spectrum. It's important to highlight that the way we define informal employment is based on lack of social insurance coverage, meaning that a worker is informal if he's not covered by social insurance, and a firm is informal, or a firm is formal if it employs at least one formal worker. Important to notice that informality does not imply illegality, because depending on the institutional context and legal context of a country, some workers might not be required by law to contribute, therefore being informal and legal. Why it's also important to relate the concept of informality or informal employment also to firms. It matters because, for at least 2 reasons: for social protection, so for coverage against contingencies, because if I work in a firm that is informal, then by definition I'm not covered. But also it has implications in terms of productivity, because, as we'll see later in the presentation, some of the institutions or legislations that create these incentives to be formal have also implications in terms of technologies that firms are incentivized or not incentivized to adopt, in terms of number of workers to hire, in terms of the contractual modalities under which such workers are hired. These percentages maybe do not provide a sense of the importance of in terms of size, but if we look at numbers at levels, we are talking about over 1.5 million informal workers in Tunisia, over 8 million informal workers in Morocco, and about 9 million informal workers in Egypt. So it's quite a large numbers, and these workers come with their families that oftentimes do not benefit from any coverage except that is provided by non-contributory social insurance, unless someone in the family works formally or in the public sector. This kind of piecemeal approach to reforms, whereby countries have always tried to extend coverage to some group of workers that until then had not been covered, or by providing incentives through special tax regimes to firms to pay some taxes, has been so far not very successful to in providing a good social security coverage to workers. And this is because there is no single reason why firms and workers behave the way they behave and operate informally. They operate in a context that is shaped by the laws, the institutions, the regulations of a country that set the rule of the games, set the incentives that economic agents face when making economic decisions, for example, to start a business, to invest, to take risk, to decide whether to work for themselves or somebody else in the case of a worker. So what we try to convey, the message we try to convey in this report is that the magic bullet, if you want, is in coordination. And coordination across three pillars, three realms. And here we take the approach, the framework developed by Santiago Levis and his co-authors Guillermo Cruces in a UNDP paper published in 2021. I'll show the reference in a second, where it's important to coordinate laws, regulations, institutions, and policies that fall in these three areas: workers and entrepreneur relations, tax and the transfer system, and market conditions. What these three groups imply. So under the first pillar, a few items fall, starting with the contributory social insurance programs, the non-contributory social insurance programs, all the regulations that concern hiring and firing of workers, regulations that concern minimum wage and collective agreements, and also the institutions that are in charge of enforcing laws and regulations. Under the tax and the transfer system, we can include laws that set the rules for of the personal income tax, of corporate income tax, of consumption taxes, and transfers, cash transfers to households. And again, the institutions that are in charge of delivering such transfers or enforcing these taxes. Under the market condition realm, which we'll not have the time to discuss in details in this presentation, falls the functioning of institutions enforcing credit and commercial contracts, registration procedures of firms, and all the laws and legislation that regulate domestic competitions, tariffs, prices, state-owned enterprises. What is really important then is that firms and workers' decisions are shaped, are affected jointly by all these laws, regulations, and institutions that falls in these three areas. And these decisions determine the size of informal employment in the economy, the distribution of income, also the level of productivity, and ultimately the rate of economic growth. Here, I just show for your reference the main paper. It's a UNDP paper available for download online. This is our kind of lighthouse in terms of the framework we use. So what we suggest is that moving from a piecemeal approach to a coordinated approach. First, coordinate reforms. Policymakers should have clear in mind and keep in mind that incentives that are offered to firms and workers by the laws and regulations they design provide incentives to operate in one way or another. And this should be kept in mind whenever there is a change in an existing policy or the introduction of a new policy. In this respect, introducing, perhaps establishing an entity across ministries that can have a broader view of all the effects of a proposed policy change, it could be a way to ensure that the approach is coordinated. The second policy principle is that to cover population exposed to the same risk with the same program. For example, everybody can get sick and everybody can get old. So providing coverage to all individuals exposed to the same risk with the same programs is more effective and efficient because provide more risk pooling, and it's more effective in terms of diversification of risk, and also can provide a service of higher quality because there are more resources dedicated to the program aimed at targeting a specific risk. Third, the source of financing should differ depending on the type of risk that is covered. So risks of different nature are best covered through different sources of financing. And we'll come back to this later, but in general, risks that are common to the entire population shall be funded from out of general tax revenues. Risks that are common to all workers should be funded by via workers' earnings. And risks that are specific to workers in firms, meaning employees, should be funded from firms' contributions based on workers' wages. Fourth, social protection for the poor with non-contributory programs should be targeted based on family income, not based on workers' formality status. These can reduce the risk of trapping workers in informality and also in poverty. The tax system should provide incentives to operate formally, and together with the social protection system should be progressive. I'll come back to this at the end. Finally, policymakers should try to ensure that market conditions are conducive to firm entry, growth, and exit. This is, for example, can be implemented by simplifying registration procedures and ensuring that commercial and credit contracts are correctly enforced, perhaps with an improvement of the quality of the judicial process. And also, policies should at some point address product market competition and the presence and the role of state-owned enterprises, although a lot of debate has been going on this aspect and not much progress has been achieved, especially in the region. Okay, now let's try in the next maybe 10 minutes, I'll try to be quick, to dig a bit deeper into a couple of Realm 1 and Realm 2, just to give you some ideas of the work that is behind these policy ideas. Under Realm 1, I guess we can summarize the main findings by saying that overall, the design of the social protection system in these three countries provides limited coverage against risk and limited redistribution, particularly when it comes to health insurance and old age pension benefits. These, in combination with minimum wage laws, the complex and sometimes costly dismissal procedures, and weak enforcement of labor regulations in general, kind of encourage informality, and it is a constraint to productivity growth. Contributory social insurance in these countries provides little value for money, and therefore there are little incentives for workers to actually operate formally and even to push, in case they have any bargaining power, to be hired formally by their firms. Sometimes they're better off working informally, maybe trying to get higher wage than they would get by working formally, and then getting some coverage in other ways via non-contributory social insurance. So the system in general provides strong incentives to be formal if you are a high wage worker, not if you are a low wage worker. Contributory pension systems do not provide adequate protection against the longevity risk to private sector workers that have very short formal careers. And these are typically more likely to be at the bottom of the earnings spectrum. Contributory health insurance also, even among formal wage workers, does not deliver great coverage And households are therefore faced with considerable out-of-pocket health expenditures. And this is, of course, proportionally more true among low-wage workers. Let's look at the case of the pension system. Very briefly, here there are some of the it's a summary table of the main characteristics of the system for formal private sector workers in the 3 countries. I'm talking about pension system because it's actually the contributory rate for pension benefits is the highest within the contributory scheme. So what happens to pension system matters very much because it's the most expensive items, so to say. You see that the rate varies between 12, 13, 25% in Egypt. What happens is that the rules usually are designed in such a way that unless workers contribute for a certain number of years, that is not even very high compared to the standard in Europe, in the US. I'm not sure about Japan, but if you don't contribute at least 10 years, then what happens is you don't get any pension benefit. In the best case scenario, you get back the contributions you as a worker paid, but not the contributions that your employer paid, which is usually 2/3 of the total. So that gets lost, meaning that is used to finance the pension benefit of those that are actually in the system long enough to be eligible to a pension benefit. And these are more likely to be high-wage workers with long formal careers. So the presence of these vesting periods implies a tax on workers with short formal careers. And therefore a redistribution from low to high wage workers, because they don't get a pension benefit, low wage workers, but high wage workers, they actually get it, and they actually get more than what they paid for because of the rules of the system. And some of the contributions paid by low wage workers are actually used to finance pension benefits of high wage workers. Here is just a simple graph to show that until the minimum, basically, you don't get anything. Actually, you get very little, only the contributions you paid as a lump sum. They're not converted into an annuity. Once you reach that threshold, once you hit that threshold, in the case of Morocco is 10 years. In the case of Tunisia, you can already get something starting at 5 years. But then you see that the line is above the dotted line 1, which means workers that get that hit that threshold, they actually get way more money than what they contributed for. Another example is health insurance. Health insurance is here is just a quick summary to say that contributions paid for health insurance is much lower than what workers are required to pay for their pension benefit. And actually, it's too low sometimes to have a system that provides good coverage. Usually it's around 5–7% of wages. Contributory health insurance provides free access to public health care, but public health care systems oftentimes impose a cost in terms of long waiting lines and do not provide access to all types of treatment. So sometimes even if you're covered, you have to resort to the private sector, to the private healthcare. The negotiated tariffs under contributory social insurance sometimes pay for less than what actually the market price is charged by doctors in the private health system. And this leads to what the graph is showing, high out-of-pocket expenditures, not only at the bottom of the distribution, Q1, but also at the top. We are talking about 60% at the top and 90% at the bottom. This is Morocco 2013-2014. It's a bit outdated, but in MENA getting access to recent data is a bit of a challenge. And because of the sheer small number of workers contributing, then risk pooling is limited. And so the system does not work well. I have a slide here about non-contributory social insurance, but I see I'm running short on time, so I'll skip it, and in case of interest, I'll get back to it. But the main message here is that non-contributory social insurance provides little coverage, usually just some partial health insurance. People get a cash transfer. It could, in theory, play as a tax or a stamp formal employment, but given the small resources that in this countries are dedicated to non-contributory social insurance compared to the resources dedicated to contributory, this subsidy story is not very relevant in this case. You can see that in Tunisia, 7% of GDP goes to contributory, less than 1% to non-contributory. Similar story in Morocco and Egypt. Realm 2. Main finding here. There is this creature that is called special tax regime that provides to firms that meet certain requirements special treatment. So they favor some businesses, but they also provide these incentives to expand and grow. We'll see in a couple of slides. One word about personal income tax, since it still falls under Realm 2. Personal income tax is usually levied on personal income of individuals and on profits of individual enterprises and self-employed professionals. This is the case of Egypt and Morocco. An individual enterprise is usually defined as a firm owned by a single person. So there is one shareholder that is registered as a natural person, regardless of the number of employees, and with no distinction between the assets of the owner and the assets of the enterprise. These are very important elements, especially the single ownership. And we'll get back into it in a second. PAT rates in some countries rise very steeply. So from 0 to, for example, 26% is the marginal tax rate in the case of Morocco. So meaning that if you are completely informal and you never paid taxes, if you start formalizing, all of a sudden, if you get paid more than 5,000 dinars, you have to pay 26% of your wage above the 5,000 dinars. So it's quite a jump. Oftentimes, individual enterprises and self-employed can pay personal income tax under a very favorable tax regimes relative to the regular PAT rates, depending on these characteristics. Typically, these special tax regime impose restrictions in terms of sectors, in terms of revenues, and in terms of, we'll see, VAT. Special tax regime. So they basically provide significant tax savings to firms that are self-employed as long as they respect these requirements. They are an unincorporated business. They don't operate above a threshold in terms of sale, and they are structured as a single owner enterprise. As I mentioned at the very beginning, these were introduced designed with good intentions. Because they were meant to support micro and small firms and enterprise. They were introduced to encourage compliance and expand the tax base a little bit, and therefore increase tax revenues. But they also led to low total factor productivity and little formal job creation for many reasons. Because if there is a requirement whereby you can be under the special tax regime only if you don't pass a threshold in terms of sales, that means operating below what could be the optimal scale, the optimal size for the firm. So there is a disincentive to grow in size in terms of sales, not necessarily in terms of employment. Oftentimes they help small firms with very low productivities to survive, because if these firms had to pay corporate income tax rates, they would probably be pushed out of the market because they are not productive enough. And this is also distorting the process of firm selection, the entry and exit. Oftentimes these tax regimes, these special tax regimes are associated with VAT exemption. So And because the way VAT works as a credit, these firms under these special tax regimes are not able to operate and interact with other firms, typically larger firms, that operate under the corporate income tax, the regular standard regime. So there is also limited interactions in terms of technological transfer, because there is no incentive for large firms to be in the same supply chain of the small firms, because they cannot claim back VAT. These special tax regimes, because of the single shareholder, single ownership, they also limit capital diversification. And this has implications in terms of ability to access credit or at all, or to access credit at better conditions, because if you have a capital base more diversified, you're possibly more likely to access credit easily or easier, in an easier way. The next slide is quickly just snapshot, just to give you a sense of the details that we have looked at in terms of PAT for firms, special tax regimes, corporate income tax regimes, the VAT. But let's focus on one example, Tunisia, the special tax regime. So it implies that firms need to be unincorporated enterprises with annual sales below 10,000 dinars, or between 10,000 and 100,000 dinars. In that case, they pay taxes as 3% of the annual sale, compared to 25 and 35% under the standard or the CIT rate for financial insurance and other activities. In the case they are very small, under the 10,000, they just pay basically not a tax as a lump sum, 100 or 200 dinars per year, depending on where they operate. It's very, very little money compared to the general to the corporate income tax regime, and also they are not subject to a VAT, which is 18%. Implications. So these rules have skewed the distribution of firms towards the left, meaning small size firms. You can see that in Tunisia, for example, this graph refers to the case of Tunisia. 74% of firms of formal firms employ up to 5 employees. The vast majority are actually own account workers, so it's basically just one worker. And medium-sized and large firms are very few. Many individual enterprises, many of these small enterprises operate under the special regimes, contributing very little to tax revenues. Individual enterprises under the special tax regime represent 12% of tax revenues from individual enterprises, compared to 88% of enterprises under the standard regime. And on average, they pay very, very little money. So it's not been even effective very much in terms of broadening the tax base and increasing tax revenues, besides the negative effects on formal job creation and productivity growth. Here we provide some examples, and I only have a little time left. First, improve value for money of contributory social insurance. How? Focus on health insurance and retirement pensions. If health insurance and retirement pensions provide good value for money, workers might be more incentivized to start contributing and be part of the system. Then start a gradual unbundling of risk and insurance. As we mentioned at the beginning, health insurance could be financed via general tax revenues, and retirement pensions instead could, because they apply not to all but to workers, could be financed with an additional charge that is proportional to workers' wage, that should be paid together, could be paid together with personal income tax and set aside in a dedicated fund. So the responsibility would be on workers, not on firms and workers. So incentives would be aligned, because as a worker, I pay for something that I will be entitled to. Unbundle risk and insurance. This is going a little bit more into the details of what I alluded to before. Risks of different nature are best covered with different sources of financing. Risks that are common to all citizens should be funded from general tax revenues. What we propose is introduce universal health insurance for health, introduce a flat pension benefit to fight old age poverty, keeping in mind that a right balance should be achieved because you still have to provide incentives for people to work and pay for additional retirement pension benefit. Risks that are common to all workers should be funded from workers' earnings. All workers contribute and participate in the same system. The obligation to pay is shifted from firms to workers and possibly combined with the payment of PAT. This is basically for a contributory pension benefit on top of a universal flat pension benefit. Risks that are specific to workers in firms' employees can be funded with firms' contributions based on workers' wage. And here we are talking about job loss insurance, insurance against accidents at work. What about non-contributory social insurance? Under this proposed change, some risk would be, everyone could be covered against some risk. For example, health, and for example, old longevity through the universal flat benefit. In addition, non-contributory social insurance can provide the poor with an income transfers. Eligibility could be conditional on household income, not on workers' employment formality status. And then the amount of the cash transfer should be such that to strike the right balance between the need to support consumption, but also a need to minimize an implicit tax on formality among poor workers. What we mean is that if a poor worker start making more money, then it goes above the threshold and loses the cash transfer. So a right balance should be achieved there, and the system should be designed carefully. What about the tax system? Tax system should be more conducive to formality, productivity, and firm growth. So PAT could be made more progressive. As we said, sometimes the jump in the tax rate is very steep. Special tax regime should be abolished, and VAT exemptions removed for firms that fall under the special tax regime. How to finance all this? There is space to increase tax revenues. Here we have tax to GDP ratios in countries that we study and in OECD countries. We see that they're still low, right? We are talking about 33% on average in OECD countries compared to 14, 20, 25% in our countries. So there is space to increase tax revenues. And again, in these countries, most tax revenues come from indirect taxes, VAT, which are also quite regressive. I'm not going to the details now because there is no time. How to increase tax revenues? Perhaps introducing property tax or tax on environmentally unfriendly activities. Tax enforcement should improve, should be strengthened. Many micro firms and informal workers evade taxes. So this requires more resources to tax authorities, better integration of data, use of digital technology, perhaps to improve enforcement, and more collaboration across entities. And I'll end with this slide, which is a tentative proposed roadmap in terms of sequence of reforms. And of course, this is a general idea, but every country will have to kind of design and tailor the specific reform process. The first one could be extend health coverage to the whole population. This is a way to first start giving something before asking for more, right? Introduce health insurance. We did some back of the envelope calculations that I don't have here, but they are in the report. Doing this would not cost a humongous amount of money. Pension systems. Under this proposal, workers would be the only responsible to pay contributions for their pension benefit that could be done in combination with the payment of personal income tax. Firms would not be responsible. This would align incentives because I'm incentivized to pay, because if I don't pay, I'm not going to get a pension benefit. Firms do not have any incentive to pay because they're not going to get any pension benefit out of the contributions they pay for their workers. Remove vesting periods and make the system actuarially fair. So you get what you pay for, not more nor less, not less. Provide a flat non-contributory pension benefit to all citizens above a certain age, 60, 65, depending on the country, in order to minimize the risk of old age poverty. But just provide a minimum that does not provide this incentive to work and contribute. Expand the tax base and increase tax revenues to fund universal health insurance and improve the quality of public services. So new taxes could be introduced, property, and as I said, in certain industries. Remove universal consumption subsidies that cost a lot of money and benefit everybody, including middle class and the rich. Some countries have already started to move in this direction. Gradually remove special tax regimes and VAT exemptions, and at the same time as tax revenue increase, try to improve the quality of public services that are delivered, maybe starting with healthcare. We are not saying that transitions will be costless. Some people will lose, but so the transition has to be managed carefully, but in the long term, the benefits are way higher than the cost. Make job stability regulations more flexible and minimum wage less binding. We didn't talk very much in this presentation about this, but this is also important because unemployment insurance will be such that if you lose a job, you will be covered. So job stability, firing regulations can be made less strict and less costly. And last but not least, it's again about the market conditions. Again, we did not talk in details in this presentation, but it's about reducing the cost of firm registration, better enforcement of credit contracts, etc., and also foster improved product market competition. We are aware that this is what we are trying to say is that this is a long-term agenda, but oftentimes what has been done in the past to try to put a patch to accommodate and make a very short-sighted change does not lead to significant improvements for the population. So it's better to have this long-term horizon in mind and try to kind of look at what all the effects of policy changes, because everything is interrelated. So whatever one does in one sector has implications in other sectors. I hope I gave you some insight into what this report is about. I'll stop there and happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marco, and also Gladys, for giving us a snapshot with a very detailed explanation about what this report talks about. We received several questions from the viewers. I forwarded those questions to both of you, Gladys and Marco, giving you opportunity to consider to prepare. But let me read those questions, all of them actually, and then I'll ask both of you to come in and then respond in a comprehensive manner. So the first question that we received from Valmiki from Tumakuru University, actually it's in India. Let me read. How can we deliver the fruits of inclusive growth to socially excluded sections in developing countries? So this was a question from the Valmiki. So this is one. The second question we received in advance from Anas from Australia National University. Thank you for sending your question in advance. Let me read. What gaps exist in the taxation reform implemented across the MENA region over the past decade? And how can these reforms be modified to accommodate a more inclusive stance in an environment characterized by high levels of informal employment? So this was a question from Anas. Then we received a set of comment and questions from the Professor Yoshino of the Keio University during the presentation. Thank you very much. Let me read the Professor Yoshino's point and question. First, there will be the role of the government and the role of the company to support vulnerable people. It also consists of the emergency policy against COVID-19 and the long-term structural policies. Is in the presentation today, both of them seems to be differentiated. Second, as for financing, tax revenue, government bonds, and the borrowing from multilateral institutions, is there any superiority of each policy compared to others? This was the second point, was the question. The third one, based on your observations, which country did relatively better than other countries? Why could they perform better? These are the questions from the Professor Yoshino. So I'll invite Gladys and Marco to come in, and then both of you somehow to orchestrate among yourselves to make the comment on those points raised by our viewers. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the comments. Maybe I'll try to take some, and then Gladys can chime in as she likes. One, okay, I'm reading because I don't remember them by heart. So, what gaps exist in the taxation reform implemented across the MENA region over the past decade, and how can these reforms be modified to make a more inclusive stance in an environment characterized by high levels of informal employment? I suppose, based on the analysis we have done, the main issue has been that, again, the changes have been introduced with different or very specific objectives in mind. That's also why sometimes informality means different things to different people. If you talk to a Minister of Finance, informality is someone is not paying tax. If you talk to the Ministry of Labor, then informality is worker is not paying contributions, or the firm is not paying contributions for the worker. And this has led to reforms that are not do not take into account the incentives that, or the effects that such changes have in terms of informality, social protection, inclusiveness. Being more specific, in most cases, for example, the special tax regimes have been maintained, and these special tax regimes are not beneficial, not just in terms of the limited tax revenues that are able to collect, but also in terms of inclusiveness, because they do not provide incentives for firms to create more formal jobs. Because if you have a limit in terms of sales that you need to respect to be under that tax regime, you're not incentivized to hire many people to grow in size. The same applies to the VAT exemption that comes with this special tax regime that does not is not conducive to technology transfers, and if there are technical and technological spillovers across firms, that also contributes to higher productivity, and higher productivity can translate into more inclusiveness, for example, by providing workers with higher wages, or by providing government with more revenues. How can we deliver the fruits of inclusive growth to socially excluded sections in developing countries? I think usually what we say, and this is beyond this report, is that growth is inclusive when all the population across the welfare distribution, or the income distribution, or the expenditure distribution benefit from growth, right? And one way to benefit from growth is basically by allowing people having access to jobs. Oftentimes, the poor, the only way they have to participate and benefit from growth is through their labor. So if you by creating more jobs, then that's a way redistribution take place. Besides, of course, the fiscal redistribution, whereby with more growth, then there are more revenues, and with more revenues, governments can provide more transfers and more in general, more public services and goods to the population. Then there are other questions about the role of government, the role of company to support vulnerable people. Gladys, do you want to take some of those? And then there are...
I was reading the questions, and I think each can be encapsulated into two areas, no? One is this agenda which we try to move forward in terms of inclusive growth. So I think the main messages that Marco was trying to convey in the presentation is that we need to look at the short and the long run and try to make sure that the policies are implemented in a consistent manner so that we don't have good intentions and bad outcomes, no? So that we assist the population during COVID crisis, for instance, no, with mechanisms that can help them, but that also we don't create distortions in these systems and perpetuate informality. So we have to design a system which is incentive compatible in the short and long run, and help to ensure mobility of workers, support to the most needed, and a good redistribution, as Marco was saying. So more than the details, it's the main message is in the how to think about this, so that we move or we advance on this agenda on formality. And also, let me tell you, I mean, in the report, and we describe it very clearly there, we are not saying, you know, that the population is formal or informal. I think there are gradients, as Marco was saying, in terms of the, you know, people that is in one stage or another in a different time of their life. There is mobility, but then we have to ensure, we have to help people that they could plan their horizon, that they could aspire to better quality of jobs, and that they could be more productive in the case of firms, and that these systems don't become a burden both for the individuals and the firms. So these are really important messages, because unless, you know, the region, are we focus on this big picture, and in terms of what we are trying to intend with the policies on the, you know, on social protection, social assistance, fiscal, and the market, and we align the incentives there, it's always going to be difficult to move out of informality. No? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments and the responses to the question and points raised by our viewers. So we have about 1-2 minutes left before the closing of seminar. So probably a few words of final remarks from both of you before wrapping up, and then we conclude the seminar. So anything to add from Marco and Gladys before the end of the seminar?
Maybe just kind of reiterating what Gladys mention. First of all, I invite you to download and read the report. That would be great because it gives you more information. We have an overview if you don't have the time to go through the whole book. But it's basically trying to push the idea that informality is the result of many different parts, and that has to be kept in mind when setting up or introducing a policy change to address it, because if you don't do that, then you will keep perpetuating a situation that has led to low growth, high informality, little productivity. So it's really a matter of keep all these pieces in mind, because as you move one piece, other piece will be affected, and if you don't have that in mind, then you don't consider what the effects of your policy changes are, and that doesn't lead to good outcomes. So I guess in short, it's the importance of a coordinated approach to informality in order to promote inclusive growth. And I'll stop here, and I thank you all again.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to second Marco, to really invite everyone to download and read the publication, because really it contains information and data that you are not going to find most recent that you can find for the region, and also as Marco said, details in terms of for people who are very curious to know more about this kind of systems in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. With us this morning, we had Gladys Lopez Acevedo, the lead economist, and Marco Lanzani, the senior economist, both from the Middle East and North Africa regions, global practice for the poverty and equity. Thank you very much for your time to present the report. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Koichi. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, next week we are going to have two morning seminars. First, October 25, 8 a.m. in Japan Standard Time, we are going to feature the South Asia Development Update, which is a South Asia version of the Regional Economic Update. We are going to have Francisca Onezorge, the new chief economist for South Asia region. And also Friday, October 27, 8 a.m. in Japan Standard Time, we are going to feature the Africa's Pulse, which is the Africa version of the Regional Economic Update. We are going to have Cesar Calderon, who is a lead economist in the Office of the Chief Economist for the Africa region. So please stay tuned. With that, I would like to thank once again for everyone to watching the seminar. Have a nice weekend and see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.